Welcome back, everybody, to Afrodo Reviews. And on this channel, I help you decide, is that book worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? Today's book is another Doctor Who Expanded Universe novel. This time written by Mark Michalowski, I believe, and published on September 4th of 2008. The focus this time is the 10th Doctor, again, objectively the best of the Doctors, and his companion, Donna Noble, on another adventure. It's the 27th book in the BBC's new series Adventure Books, which, as you can tell, follows the expanded universe stories involving the Doctor and his many companions. Apart from that, the only trivia I can offer you on this book in specific was that it was released in an audiobook format on March 12, 2009, by BBC with Debbie Chazen, who played Foon von Hoff in the Voyage of the Damned episode, aka Space Poseidon. Anyways, here are the ratings. And now on to the cover. Unlike the previous other two Doctor Who books I reviewed on this channel, this has its original cover, not receiving one as part of the 50th anniversary celebration. It's a relatively simple cover, all things considered, the brand name front and center, which is perfectly fine considering this is an expanded universe book. The episode name right below that, the Doctor and the companion of this book at the top, and a robot, which does hint at the conflict of the book, right below it. All in all, as far as elements go, it does give you enough to be interested, and I think it uses elements rather well. Now, first impression was that I thought this robot on the front was some kind of Cyberman. Though, that's really hardly something I can fault the book for. The Cybermen are just the most well-known of the Doctor's cybernetic foes, enemies, just in general, the most well-known of this robotic Doctor Who characters, I guess I should say. And I do think my original comment for the Chaos Rising book, if you remember when I talked about its original cover, also very much applies to this. While the elements do lean to the books, I do feel it's very visually busy. The oranges of the background kind of burn at your eyes as you look at the cover. And there's definitely things going on in the background behind the characters. The problem is, because the cover is so bright and visually distracting, it's hard to tell just what those elements are. I think, personally, the contrast of blue and orange would have been best, but I'm not a professional designer, so... But anyways, that's the cover. Now let's go on to the synopsis. Now, for those of you who did see my last set of videos, I'll still be trying the thing I mentioned in them. Instead of doing TBRs, considering how poorly they've been received in the past, mostly in that they don't even reach the double digits in views most of the time, I'm instead inserting my initial reaction to the book into the review itself. I'll read the synopsis on the back and give a quick idea on what that tells me before I have any knowledge of the book itself. Now, I think this is really important to the book review process because the cover and the synopsis set the expectations of the book going in. It lays the foundation of what many will be expecting when they open up the book. As mentioned in one of my reviews, The Last Bookstore, this can end up giving the readers false expectations of what can happen. Anyways, love it, hate it, neutral on it, let me know so I know how to proceed in the future on this. But for now, first impressions of Doctor Who's Shining Darkness. I don't know anything about this. This is one of the ones I don't think got an updated cover. I think they only chose select books from the particular fandom stuff. As far as I can tell, for the most part, only like a couple books. They had like one from each Doctor generation. I do believe I have one more of the anniversary edition, but for the moment being, Doctor Who Shining Darkness is going to be another one that I'm going to look at. As you can tell, I very, very, very briefly started already. A chapter. Not even a chapter. A single page is all I am into it. So I can't tell you anything else about it other than it's got Donna Noble in it. I am actually kind of looking forward to that, because Donna Noble is one of the best companions in the newer series. Personally, I think Martha was a little underrated, and I'm going to be looking forward to trying to find those specific editions, the one that has Martha in it. But for now, I'm actually kind of looking forward to this one. Without reading the back, I'm going to guess this has something either to do with Cybermen, or like a prototypical Cyberman, but I don't know, because it's too alien to look Cybermen, at least from how they've been depicted thus far. But I don't really have anything else to say, so let's go ahead and read the back. For Donna Noble, the Andromeda Galaxy is a long, long way from home. But even 2.5 million light years from Earth, danger lurks around every corner. A visit to an art gallery turns into a race across space to uncover the secret behind a shadowy organization. From the desert world of Karis to the interplanetary scrapyard of junk, the Doctor and Donna discover that appearances can be deceptive, and that enemies are lurking around every corner, and that the centuries-long peace between humans and machine may be about to come to an end. But waiting in the wings to bring chaos to the galaxy is the cult of shining darkness. Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm not really sure what to make of this. I'll probably have more by the time I'm actually recording the video proper. A little more background on this, see if it's like pulling back old Doctor Who villains like the last book did. But from the one page I have read of it, I'm actually already a little bit more optimistic for this one compared to the other two. Because this one, I don't know if it's been a while since I've seen the other two, but this one actually feels like it has a little more effort put into it to be a book. But I guess we'll find out. I guess I already found out as of, you seeing this, but I hope it turned out good. Now, the burning question. How does this book hold up? Well, to start, I think this book is definitely better than the previous two. This one almost feels like it was conceived as a book first, rather than being a recycled script that was dug out of the trash. We even get descriptions for most of the characters, though they are rather light, and that does include Donna, though the Doctor sort of resides in that vague, undescribed nature, although I think it kind of works for him. In addition, it does feel like it was much more carefully written compared to the other two, as if they weren't expecting an actor to take over and add their own flair of charisma to the role. Now, don't get me wrong, the Doctor does still definitely suffer without the wonderful acting talents of David Tennant behind his eccentricities.
We have an intruder! How did he get in? Into the window?
But I feel like I could read this book without having watched an episode of the Donna companion run, and still gotten a rather fair idea of who she was as a person. She retains a fair amount of her sass, and we see her and the Doctor complement each other in a number of ways. Though this book does lean a bit more on the side that the Doctor has a crush on Donna, I don't particularly remember that being a strong part of their dynamic, especially considering how much of it was Rose's and the Doctor's dynamic. But personally, Donna and the Doctor never worked for me as a romantic pairing. So I will say that's one element of this book that I didn't quite like. I feel like they work better as very close friends. In addition, the new characters ooze with enough personality that I think they stood pretty well without an actor attached to them. I get a fair idea of who Booney, Mother, Garamond, and Malanth are without someone having to throw a voice and a living human's charisma onto them. Personally, I think this is because of the fact that the storyline feels like it was made for books. Now, I mentioned in my previous two reviews that they felt like they were scripts dug out of the trash for the sake of the story, brushed off, and then just kind of thrown out there in book form. This was much more egregious with Only Human, which felt like it only did the bare minimum to actually convert from script to book. It felt like only a couple of extra lines were added, but for the most part, the story felt like at any moment I would have to sit back and just watch a commercial break.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
Meanwhile, when it came to Chaos Rising, it was definitely better about it. Like, it did feel like some more effort was put into actually writing that as a book. But at the same time, there were still some issues behind it. I mentioned how it clearly expected you to be a super fan of the series. Not only did it expect you to already have a very clear idea of who the Doctor, Donna, and her grandfather already were by the time you came into the story, thus providing you no context whatsoever to them, but it also relied on very deep Doctor lore. It brought back a villain from before the revival of the series, and it felt like it was expecting a lot of that malice of the threat this villain possessed to already be present in the story. As someone who never saw the episode of the main villain that was in that book, the villain otherwise just sort of felt like a very lackluster threat who waved their fist very threateningly at the Doctor for most of the book and then lost. Thinking that, you obviously kind of consider, well, why weren't these made into episodes? Well, only human, you can probably easily guess. It was either cut for budget or a lack of time to do it. It feels like one of those episodes mid-season that's just kind of like a filler episode. Gives you a little breathing room between lore-heavy episodes or heavier emotional episodes, where we can just kind of sit back and laugh at the wild new scenario, but never really get that attached. Chaos Rising, however, I feel was cut because it felt more like a superfan thing. Since it was a thing of the revival and the villain they were bringing back wasn't as ingrained in the consciousness of fans like the Daleks were or the Cybermen were, I feel like that maybe they thought there was too much legwork involved to remind the audience of who the main villain would have been. And even the Cybermen in the revival were given new origins so that we, as the newcomer audience, didn't need further context of who they were to understand they were a threat. So when you get to that, I feel like the reason Chaos Rising was pushed off is because it's one of those that not everyone would get. Only the older fans of the show would be like, oh, this is so cool. This one, however, well, honestly, it feels like it was tossed out because the technology simply wasn't there to make this episode. There's a strong sense of passion behind this book that wasn't really present in the previous two books. It feels like someone was very excited to tell this story in specific, given the amount of comparative care given to its plotline, and how much more carefully it approaches its premise and themes, and how much more well-written it appeared to be in terms of how it was written as a book. It has a heavier emphasis on robots, which was possible for the CGI at the time, but I don't think to the extent that BBC would have shelled out the amount of budget required for this single episode. Just for a reference, here's... That being said, for as much as I praise this book, I do think it does fumble in some places. The main one being how it approaches the message. I certainly don't disagree with the inevitable conclusion that it comes up with due to the theme of its story. I will say that it is very heavy-handed in how it presents that theme. It doesn't really want to offer any sort of nuance to the center or the other side of the debate. Now, this would be fine as a story is, in effect, a story about civil rights. And really, there are very few times where the center or the other side of the debate that's not, hey, maybe we should treat these living sentient beings as people, are really worth exploring in any way. At least not worth exploring in a way that makes you feel for them, but more just exploring in a way that makes you understand why they think that, but still very much on the side that they're wrong to think that. However, in this case, I think it would have been important because the story itself introduces a lot of elements to consider. So, some minor spoilers. Not enough to ruin the story, I think, but the main debate is about whether robots should be treated as sapient creatures, or if they should be treated as just, well, robots, who've gotten really good at mimicking human emotions. Now, obviously, if you know the Doctor, he's clearly going to take the side that robots are just as human as humans, relatively speaking, and rightly points out on how allowing discrimination of one group that can clearly feel and think for itself and dehumanizing them can lead to a slippery slope of further, much more extreme prejudice. Think of that old poem that gets tossed around when discussing 1940s, certain types of things that happened then.
In Germany, they came first for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me. And by that time, nobody was left to speak up.
But the problem I think occurs is when the story introduces what it calls the Lipinov rating. Or in the more Milky Way terms, a score that the robot would get on a Turing test. Past the score of, I think, 80, a robot is considered sentient, enough so that the servitude and treatment begins to bring in the questions of ethic and morality. However, anything below that, and they don't even really qualify as sentient. So a robot with a score of, say, 10 isn't smarter than your average toaster oven, for example. So with that in mind, one of the questions it really does have to address in this discussion of civil rights, because we're not talking about like another biological race that are just born as they are and there's no way they can help it. We're talking about robots that are built. We do have that question. Where do you draw the line? Now, you see, the bad guys, they have a clearly extreme approach. Obviously, the line doesn't exist. It doesn't matter if the robot scores a 1 or 1,000 on this test. It doesn't qualify as sentient. So they don't want to treat them as anything more than a tool. However, when we get to the other side, they have almost the opposite, equally extreme approach. Robots that aren't smarter than a toaster oven are treated with the same gravitas as robots like Mother, the main robot character of The Good Guys, who has a score of 80? You know what? It might have been 60 earlier. I'll correct that. Except when it's inconvenient for them. Sure, some lip service is provided with them saying they feel bad about it, but the second that they need to, they really aren't above smashing non-sentient robots to pieces. And this is the same group that almost all collectively turns against Donna at one point when she threatens a robot to tell them what he knows. Because in their eyes, it shows Donna as a barbaric brute who thinks she can just threaten an innocent, pure being like that with no remorse. Despite the fact that I would totally see Donna making the same threat to a human just to get them to talk. And the same robot that she's threatening delivered literal death threats to them earlier. Now, mind you, in the story, that's explained away by the robot getting hacked, basically. But at the time she was threatening this robot, she didn't know that. I just feel that the debate in this book is a little loose and gets a little lost with all the things considered. This feels especially terrible when, at one point, near the end, there are some reveals and some twists we learn about certain characters. When you learn those twists, it begins to feel very largely hypocritical in hindsight. But I'm really not going to go into detail on those because that's much more into the spoiler territory, and all things considered, this book is pretty decent. I don't want to spoil too much because I want to encourage you to read this book. Apart from that, there are still some rougher technical elements to this book. More than once, I noticed a misquotation mark when the character starts talking, and there are a couple misspelled words. I want to hate them more because this is BBC itself behind the book, and they have the money to hire editors. But at the same time, we can both guess that they weren't really caring all that much about these books, at least not in the same way as their TV shows and marketing. These books are just thrown out there to cash in on a more niche demographic that just wants to read doctor books. And I know they really don't care all that much. This isn't a passion project for them. A lot of stories that begin in other mediums that get books, you can kind of tell most of the books don't care. If my channel has proven anything when I dive into these types of books. But, you know, all in all, I'd give this book about a 7 out of 10. Yeah, this is a bit of a shorter review, largely because I don't have too much to say on it. Even in terms of big sweeping compliments, I don't really have all that much to say. I do think it's a good book, but I don't know if I would really say I'm dying to get you to read it, you know? It's a book I definitely would recommend. If you want to read expanded lore doctor books, this is the first book I would recommend of the 3 I have read. And I would definitely recommend it to you. There's actually a reason I haven't gone so deeply into the spoilers as I did with the other 2 books, because I do think this book is worth reading. That being said, like I said, it does get a little heavy-handed with the theme of its messaging. Not that I disagree with its theme. I just think due to the nature of the group it's arguing for, a little more nuance would have been appreciated, especially when it shows the hypocrisy of the good guy side. All in all, there's really not much else to say about this book. I liked it. I would recommend it, but you don't scramble over yourself trying to find it. If you see it, pick it up, kind of thing. With that being said, yeah, I got nothing else to add. So just remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having, even the bad ones. See you later, everyone.